Fish Stripes live. Here we go. The start of a new Marlins series, and that means that we're back here at Fish Stripes to preview the series, especially tonight's game, to get you caught up on what you missed. I'm Eli Sussman. I run Fish Stripes, and so far we're about 1 month into these live streams. I hope you guys are enjoying it. And joined today, it's mostly a two-man show. It's going to be me and our intern, Kevin Barral, who is going to be stepping up and talking about what we're expecting from this Marlins versus Nationals series. Finally got to the last leg of this road trip. I mean, it's something that this team did not have to experience at all last year. 3 cities, 10 games in total, and they're most of the way through it. They didn't make it through this point very easily. They've lost a lot of key players, from Brian Anderson to Starling Marte right before the trip, now Jazz Chisholm Jr., and even entering this game with Corey Dickerson and Garrett Cooper nicked up. That at this point, I mean, when I posted the lineup a little bit earlier, people are understandably kind of concerned about what potential the healthy guys have to actually keep this going and scoring runs. But yeah, do you share that same concern that at this point, with all the key players that they have out, that even in the matchup tonight against aging John Lester, coming off a bad year, that you have some concerns, I guess, about the talent that they have available and whether we'll actually be able to put up some runs on the scoreboard?
I think we should always have concerns, to be honest. But I mean, last series against the Brewers, I think we were injured, but it wasn't as bad. We only lost one more player, which was Corey Dickerson. He did have an impact in that series, but it's been the Jesus Aguilar show. It's been just that whole team together, just bringing hits, bringing in runs, bringing in offense, and that's what I think they're going to do in Washington as well. I am a little bit concerned, but not really, because this team has been really good offensively. If we're really talking about this team, I mean, beating the Milwaukee Brewers 8-0, then losing 5-4, and then beating them once again 6-2. This team has been good offensively. And this Washington team, which is a little banged up, they don't have their best hitter, Juan Soto. The Marlins should be in a good spot to start some offense tonight.
Yeah, joining us, Alex Carver, right on time, even though he's got some work going on. He'll never miss a show, it seems like, especially tonight. I mean, we do have a couple interesting storylines that especially tie in to the prospect side. The little bit of news that came out pregame was the move to recall Monte Harrison, who was training at the Fish Tank in Jacksonville. And we saw him a little bit in the majors last season, about 50 plate appearances, and especially when they were missing all the players due to COVID. And he's somebody that we've been following for years. I mean, he's been in the organization now for over 3 years. And at this stage, entering a stage of his career where there's only so much that you can learn down on the farm, that you just need to be tested at the highest level. Alex, I think it caught us a little bit by surprise that Monte was the one that got called up to replace Daniel Castano. But yeah, what are your expectations for the role that he's going to have on the team, and what if he's going to be successful, at least a little bit more than he was last year?
Yeah, Eli, I think this will be a short look, most likely, with guys getting healthier. Brian Anderson, we heard, is not too far away. And then the Marlins will need a 5th starter, I think, during the homestand. So you're going to need to make room for that. I was expecting a bullpen piece. I think you were as well. But I thought they were just going to bolster the bullpen in that spot. But they go to Monte, get a little length on the bench, I guess, right? Mattingly said pregame that it's just going to be a bench role. Maybe he'll squeeze.
I think we lost him.
Yeah, I think we did. I'll pick him where he left off. Yeah, he's all frozen on us. Well, there he's back. We lost you for a few seconds. But
my connection is ridiculous. I may have to go to my phone. But anyways, yeah, I think you guys heard me. I thought it was going to be a bullpen guy. Maybe you thought about getting him in there tonight, but Brinson gets the spot. I think they're more interested in seeing exactly where Brinson is and if he can turn it on here late in his Marlins tenure than Monte. I think Monte's got a little longer leash. So, yeah, I don't expect it to be a long stay for Monte, but Mattingly did say he's liked the reports out of the ATS, or the Fish Tank, excuse me. Maybe he's changed his swing up a little bit, cut down on strikeouts. So we'll see where he's at.
One thing that I guess I'm a little embarrassed that I didn't really think this through entirely, that it makes more sense in hindsight that they called him up just because he's on the 40 man. I mean, the other candidates that they could have called up on the pitching staff side, the viable candidates that are on the taxi squad right now, they were really the only two that were on my mind were Anthony Bender, hashtag Bendermania. We were all hoping to see him at some point soon just because of how electric he was in spring training. And also Sean Moramondo is someone that is not, admittedly, we're not as hyped about him per se. We didn't just see quite as much of him during the spring, and his stuff isn't quite at that same level, but he is a starter by trade. He is presumably kind of stretched out. So he seemed like a candidate that could fit in, especially he's someone that has some similarities to like Daniel Castano. So if they were going to option down Castano, it makes some sense. The problem is both of those guys are not on the 40 man. And there are ways to like actually squeeze them on technically. I mean, this is a move that we've referenced a few times where we're expecting to see right-hander George Guzman eventually transferred to the 60-day injured list. That's a pretty simple way to open up a spot, but you're not really going to want to open up a spot and call up somebody unless you really, they don't want to start the clock earlier than they need to on those guys. And just because there is, correct me if I'm wrong, there is that off day coming up on Monday, right? Yeah. So I guess there's not a big urgency at all, like for them to add another pitcher to the roster. And so that combined with the fact that Monte was already on the 40 man and that both Dickerson and Garrett Cooper are a little bit nicked up, although hoping to be at full strength, if not by the end of tonight, then by tomorrow, that just as some insurance for them really, in case those things turn out to be more serious than they actually were. So that's my theory, is it just came down to the 40 man situation.
This could also come down to injuries. I mean, the Marlins have been injured. We talked about it in the last live stream that they don't have much bench bats, and I think Monte is just going to add to that at some point. And he's also a good base runner, so it could help in those situations if they go into an extra inning game or they just need someone in the late innings to run for a hitter.
It's, I mean, the issue, it's not really an issue, but the sad reality of the Marlins right now is that they basically have Monte, they have Jose Devers, and they have Magneuris Sierra all in the same role, though. That's kind of what all of them are on this roster right now, right? They're just potential defensive replacements and pinch runners. Like, you don't even trust the bat with any of them. Of those three, maybe Sierra is the strongest candidate. Mm-hmm. And just, I guess you could be generous and say that Brinson offers a little bit more of a well-rounded skill set, but we know that the biggest question with him is that we don't know if he can hit. I mean, he's really very rarely shown it's such a weak bench. There's no really way to sugarcoat that it's hard to assemble a bench that is going to be less impactful for this stage of the season. And I guess when you really consider it that way, that even with these losses that they've had due to injury, as long as the regulars in the starting lineup kind of do what we know they're capable of doing, then honestly, the bench won't necessarily drag you down too much. As long as Jesus Aguilar keeps hitting, and if Corey Dickerson picks up where he left off right before suffering his minor groin issue, John Birdie has very quietly been pretty consistent. Oh, yeah. There's enough, I guess. There's enough potentially to stay afloat, especially when you're playing a Nationals team that is also pretty mediocre right now. Honestly, a team that is, if you compare these teams, like in all facets of the game, the Marlins, even with these injury losses, are probably in better shape than the Nationals are.
Yeah, I mean, it is a rough bench right now, as you stated, and then of course we got the rotation as well, where you have injuries there with Eliezer and other guys. So yeah, I mean, it's a matchup tonight of two pretty, pretty dinged. I mean, I wouldn't say the Nationals are dinged up. I just think the Nationals are kind of a mediocre team with a terrible farm system. So yeah, it's a bad team versus a team that's just not healthy. I mean, it's kind of a lesson in futility, I guess, tonight in this series between these two teams. So we'll see who's less bad, I guess, or less injured, I guess, in this series. Who wants to lose less, I guess, is going to be what it comes down to. But I don't know if it's going to be, too much of an exciting series. I hope I'm wrong. Do have the big matchup between Scherzer and Rogers. That's what I'm looking forward to. But yeah, these first two games, I don't know how great the baseball is going to be personally, but we'll see.
Yeah, well, we could skip ahead briefly to that Sunday matchup and then kind of work our way backwards because it doesn't get much like sexier than that to have Max Scherzer, who is already established as arguably the best pitcher of his generation, someone who is still at this stage of his career, mid-30s, still close to, if not on top of his game. And then, of course, on the very opposite end of the spectrum, you got Trevor Rogers, just 23 years old, only about a dozen starts into his major league career, and ascending as someone that you don't want to compare the two. You don't want to put Scherzer expectations on Rogers, but he's ascending as a guy that, at the very least, is an all-star caliber pitcher, a guy that has premium strikeout stuff, if nothing else. Like that's the one thing that we saw in spring training from Trevor, is that he now has these 3 great plus weapons that he can miss bats with, and that he's going to have a shot to be competitive in every game he pitches, just because he's so hard to pick up for a variety of reasons, and the quality of his stuff keeps improving. That game there's going to be a lot of eyeballs on that game on Sunday for sure. And yes, Peter Pratt joining us in the chat. We appreciate you. Trevor, only 23 years old, 23 and a half pretty much at this stage of his career, and coming off back-to-back scoreless starts. And I mean, we've already talked plenty about Trevor on the stream. What I've mentioned a couple of times is that I'm just have my fingers crossed that Juan Soto is able to rejoin the team for Sunday, because I just want to see Trevor get tested against like a real competitive major league quality lineup that, through no fault of his own, back-to-back starts against the Orioles when the Orioles were down a couple injured players, and then the Brewers when they were down a couple injured players and sitting what was Colton Wong, who was their hottest hitter at the time, that his last 2 times out, he's faced incredibly weak lineups. And that's to say nothing of the fact that you got the pitcher batting on the bottom, but that's going to be the case for most games this year. I don't know how much new stuff we've learned about Trevor from those last 2 outings, just because the quality of his competition stunk. And with the Nationals, even without Soto, I think they're a step up compared to those teams. But especially if Soto is in there, and this would be the first time that those guys face each other, that I just got my fingers crossed that he faces their best possible lineup, so that from there, because we're confident in him being successful, but I don't want that hype train to get out of control until he actually proves it against what a real major league lineup, if that makes sense.
Well, you wouldn't consider the Mets a real major league lineup? I mean, they have a pretty good team.
Well, there's no doubt that even before these past 2 scoreless starts, that Trevor's been really impressive. He's done things that you think will translate, absolutely. And what he did against the Mets was almost the same results that he got against the Orioles and the Brewers, but not quite. I mean, when we look at this guy and we see his ERA is in the 1s, that I feel that is extremely misleading, just because he's facing these last 2 starts, he's facing lineups against guys that can't really do any damage against him, even when he does make occasional mistakes. So that's all I'm bringing up. I got nothing against Trevor.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm very optimistic about him. But there's an article that I'll have coming up on the website where I just want to put into perspective where he stands compared to the other quote unquote vets in this rotation, compared to Sandy and Pablo, where there's based on the results that Trevor has had early on the season. There are some people, not a ton, but some people that are already eager to like put him at the top of this rotation, to maybe get their expectations, I feel, a little out of whack about him just because of the success that he has had. And I think we could all agree that by the end of the year, his ERA is going to be a little bit higher than 1.29.
Oh, yeah.
And I just want to brace people for when that happens.
Yeah, especially when it comes to the end of the season where teams are, I mean, especially the ones that are right there to either wild card spot or a divisional spot, they're going to be desperate to make the playoffs. They're going to bring the best they've got. I mean, and that's what Trevor's going to have to face at some point in the season. And maybe that's when his ERA is going to go up. As of right now, he's pitching excellent. I mean, there's no other way to put it. And Sunday's going to be a good test for him. He's already faced DeGrom. He wasn't scared of DeGrom. He faced Corbin Burns. Now he's going to face Max Scherzer. So we'll see how that goes. I think this should be a good series for Rogers, pretty much to show what he did against the Brewers and the Orioles. So I think we could see the same Trevor Rogers there.
Yeah, Eli brings up a great point about wanting to see him against like prime time lineups, right? And not that this Nationals team has been bad offensively. They've kind of been screwed by their pitching. Their pitching ERA as a whole is 4.45, which is 10th in the National League, which is not great. Probably most of the reason why they're 9-12 under the Marlins. So even without Soto, and yes, would like to see Soto in there for sure. I hope he is healthy because that just gives, this Trevor Rogers train that I am definitely a part of and have been for a while, some more power because, if he could do it against this lineup with Turner and, they got a couple other good bats in there as well, Castro and everything else, these established major leaguers, right? That's what you want to see from a young kid is that they can pitch against big-time lineups. And even though this team is struggling, and I don't think it's a necessarily great team overall, the Nationals, their offense is legitimate. So, yeah, you want to see him do it against those teams. So hopefully Soto's healthy, but even if he's not, it's still a good test. And if he overcomes it and overcomes Scherzer, it's another big step.
Yeah, the reason why I put up that comment from a Bassmaster guy, very avid fish picks player. I appreciate you, man. Stay competitive with our fish picks, Mr. Bassmaster. But he brought up the Braves game where Trevor went 5 innings in that game. He allowed 2 runs. And if you guys do remember in particular with that Braves game, the only 2 runs he allowed was red hot Ronald Acuna Jr. He got this fastball that was like way inside off the plate, and he somehow yanked it fair down the line for a 2-run homer. And I think that's exactly kind of what I'm mentioning here when it comes to the quality of the competition, where even when he makes a good pitch, that the best major league hitters are ones that can simply put a better swing on it no matter what. That it sometimes even the best execution, you're not going to be perfect just because of the ability that the hitters have at this major league level when they're all available. That's kind of what I mean, that the last couple of starts, he just has not even faced anybody in those lineups that has the potential to do that on a well-located pitch. So I'm just going to be very fascinated to see what he does every time out moving forward, because he has all the ingredients that you love. And I think even more so than anything else, I love his commands. The fact that the combination of his commands and his velocity and his physical characteristics from the left side, all that from the left side, I don't think anybody else in a major league starting rotation has that right now. That's why it's so new to us that it's exciting. But we'll just have to see. I think it's something that over a larger sample, we get a really good feel at exactly where he stacks up with the best pitchers in the game and with the best pitchers in this rotation.
Yeah, and you talk about difficult lineups. It's not going to be easy for the Marlins this month. They're playing teams like the Dodgers, the Diamondbacks have been pretty good, the Boston Red Sox, and the Phillies, and the Mets. So it's not going to be easy for Rogers. He's probably going to start a couple of those games. So, yeah, when you talk about getting a test, this is going to be a test for Rogers. If he could prove us wrong, if he could prove everyone wrong who's been doubting him, saying he can't face a good major league lineup, if he executes correctly and just wins those games for the Marlins, we should be talking about Trevor Rogers as a possible Cy Young candidate and National League Rookie of the Year candidate.
That pitch to Acuna, just to go back to what Eli said about that, there's probably like 3 hitters in the game of baseball that can get to that pitch, to get their hands into that pitch and hit that pitch out. You kind of heard Donnie say it after the game, that it's a pitch that you just don't see hit often. So you can't put that homer against Rogers. So without that home run, what do you give up? Other than that, not much. Right?
Nothing.
So, yeah, exactly. So that was his only. It wasn't even a mistake. It was just a great, I guess, display of ability by Ronald Acuna. So you just tip your hat to it. Other than that, in that start, he was fabulous. He's been fabulous ever since that first inning of the year. So yeah, the guy is a stud, as our buddy Pete would say, and I think he's going to continue in this series.
And yeah, this is looking a little far ahead, but the one thing to keep in mind with Trevor is that his professional baseball career, in terms of actual regular season games, has been so brief to this point that we just don't know exactly what his workload is going to be this season, what the innings limit might be, whether there is a particular innings limit with him. That he pitched pretty close to a full season in the minors in 2019. But yeah, before that, after that, he just hasn't had the opportunity to build up. That will be one of the huge questions about this season. With among the many huge questions is how long they'll let him go, whether they will let him stay in the rotation for the entire year. And that's why the phrase Cy Young is like a trigger phrase for me, because I just cannot. I think it's unlikely that they keep him in the rotation for 32 starts this year. And because of that, he won't be in that conversation for the Cy Young, just due to that. But it's still an unknown, to be honest. And that's something that I think the teams themselves are still wrestling with, knowing when to pull back on the players, exactly how to manage all that. And I mean, there's really that question with every single pitcher, but more so with Trevor than with Sandy Alcantara or with Pablo Lopez, just because they've had more experience in the majors and they're a little bit older and they're just they're further along in their club control, where the team is, when it comes to the prospects and the really young guys, that they want to be extra careful because they want to make sure these guys are fully available when the real championship contention window opens in 2022, 2023, 2024. When it comes to slightly older pitchers and you're not sure whether or not you'll want to pay those guys anyway, then that's when you take the training wheels off and you know that those guys will definitely be around for a while, if not every single start this entire season. But I did load up. Yeah, go ahead, Alex.
It's also a guy, just real quick for me on this, it's also a guy that we know coming up missed his entire first season in the minor. Well, almost his entire first season in the minors, right? So, yeah, I mean, maybe they take that into account. I know it was back in, 2017. So, he did have that forearm issue going on there. So, yeah, I mean, maybe they do limit him. I expect that they probably will, as Eli said. So, Cy Young, could it happen? Yes. Will it? Percentage chances, probably not, but Rookie of the Year is definitely within sight.
Mm-hmm.
I did want to put up Pablo. I loaded up the video clip in here, so I wanted to use it for sure because he's tonight's starter, Pablo, and he's someone that, because of Trevor, unfortunately, I feel is overshadowing what Pablo has done, and what Sandy has done has overshadowed Pablo as well, but just because of the pure quality of Sandy's stuff and obviously his reputation for being the leader of this rotation and the ace, that I'm really excited to see Pablo tonight because he's been great this year. It's a continuation of what he did last year, when last year he was the one stable presence in this rotation. And he's even doing little things this year that makes you think he could take a step forward. His breaking ball has taken small strides and he's using it in different situations. His fastball velocity is exactly where it was last year, and I feel like his command is exactly where it needs to be. And the one given with Pablo is always going to be his changeup and his willingness to throw it against righties and lefties. His changeup usage this year, I'll have to double check. I feel like it's even higher than it was last season, a career high in that category. That Pablo is great. I mean, just in case people aren't giving him enough attention, enters tonight with a 2.93 ERA. His fielder independent pitching is almost the same. It's backing that up at 3.05. It's barely allowing one base runner per inning. And I mean, the strikeout numbers are even higher, a career high strikeout rate for him to this point as well. Am I crazy, or are people overlooking Pablo a little bit through what he's done this first month of the season?
He's for sure getting overshadowed. I mean, you see Sandy, he's having a good season. Trevor Rogers, he's having another good season. So then you start looking at that rotation, you see Pablo. Pablo's having a good season. He's pitched 27 innings, 32 strikeouts, 2.93 ERA, which is pretty good. I think the bullpens have been hurting him, if I'm correct. That's something that he goes in, he does his job, he has a good game. And then at the end of the game, it's the bullpen. I think that's the only reason why we're not saying, oh, Pablo Lopez is having a great season, because then we just see 0-2. I mean, that's not really his fault. That's the bullpen's fault, in my opinion. That's hurting Pablo right now. I think he's going to have a good game tonight. This is a banged-up Washington team. They're producing pretty good offense, but I think he's going to hold them down tonight, and hopefully the bullpen doesn't screw him up tonight, for sure.
Yeah.
The one other thing I should have brought up is that probably a big role in this is just the lack of run support as well, that in a couple of his starts, they've been shut out entirely in two of his starts so far this season. So you have obviously no chance to win on those days when that happens. And I guess we'll get into tonight's lineup very shortly, but this is another lineup tonight where even against shaky competition in the Nationals, you worry about exactly how much they're going to put on the scoreboard, that this could be another night where he simply doesn't have the run support to make his appearance matter that much.
Yeah. It's, as I said before, it's going to be a exercise in futility today between these two offenses. Nationals definitely have the edge. They are missing Soto and a couple of other pieces, and their bullpen has been horrible, as has most of their pitching staff. And they're starting John Lester tonight, who the Marlins historically do very, very well against. They hit over 300 against him in his career, I think, in 7 starts. So you could take that with a small grain of salt. Obviously, this is a different team. But yeah, it's a guy that the Marlins do historically see well. But with this lineup, you kind of worry, right? Just on Pablo really quick, you mentioned that changeup usage up last year was 29.8%, and this year is at 36%. So obviously that's more innings last year versus less innings this year, but he's relying on the fastball less. He's throwing the changeup more, getting swings and misses in and out of the zone with that pitch. I want to see more of that curveball that he had in spring training. Hasn't really needed it yet, but he did put together that nice, like, slurvy looking curveball. He's only thrown it 7% of the time. Maybe we see more of that pitch from him coming up. And then, of course, also has a sinker. So, yeah, Pablo's been great, and he's kind of gotten overshadowed by other guys in this rotation, such as Trevor and Sandy. But don't overlook Pablo, man, because he's been really solid.
Our pal Sean, he mentioned this a couple hours ago when I teased that we were going to do a stream tonight about he seems to be interested in trading from the pitching surplus that the Marlins have to get a bat at some point. I mean, it's a conversation that you really shouldn't be having right now on April 30th, just because we know that there's not going to be any substantial trades for another month and a half, 2 months, if not longer than that, until we get closer to the deadline, until some teams are actually out of the conversation. I just find it silly that we're bringing this up. No offense, Sean. I appreciate your perspective, but we're at a situation right now where the Marlins have a 3-man rotation. That basically, they have Sandy, they have Pablo, and they have Trevor, and you can't get much better than those top 3. And then you just have question marks because they tried Neidert in there, and he disappointed, unfortunately. They tried Castano in there, and he was Castano. You know, you could do worse. I mean, he's someone that I'm sure we'll see later on this season as well, important depth arm to have, but they were discouraged enough by his last appearance to send him down as well. Just yesterday made that official, optioning him down to the minors, so he won't make a start. Tomorrow you have Paul Campbell in the series making his first career start. I mean, his last appearance was basically a start anyway, but this will be the first official one from the first inning onward, and we have no idea what we're going to get from Paul Campbell. I mean, we simply don't. I mean, he's here because he's a Rule 5 draft pick, and they have to have him on the roster. And he's in the rotation now, not because he's earned a spot, but by necessity, because he's on the 40-man roster. He's on the active roster, and he's mostly stretched out as a normal starter would be. So they have to use him, and that's kind of why he's getting this opportunity by default. So they're not in a situation right now at all where they have any sort of pitching surplus to trade from. They're counting on, fingers crossed, they're counting on Sixto returning to full strength and Eliezer returning to full strength and Edward Cabrera by the end of the season returning to full strength and getting called up. And there's the reality of pitching is that these guys, they don't always stay healthy. And that even if all those guys do come back, then there's just no guarantee that Sandy and Pablo and Trevor all make it through the full season.
You could go on, my bad.
Just finishing up, it's at this certain stage where the team obviously has holes on offense at the moment due to other injuries that they have, but they have holes in their rotation too, it's really remarkable that they've played as well as they've had, because they have holes almost everywhere. It's ironically, the one place where they don't seem to have that many holes right now is the bullpen. The bullpen is kind of what's been keeping them afloat during this road trip, that almost everybody in that pen is stepping up, but not in a position right now to trade starting pitchers, in my opinion.
Yeah, and this is why I think they should sign a guy like Anibal Sanchez. He's the best pitcher on the market right now. He's been training in Miami, or he's done the bullpens in Miami. The Marlins have been able to see him. He's solid. He would reunite with the Marlins. He's on the Florida Marlins. So this would be a perfect, I think, fit for Anibal Sanchez. He'd probably be the 4th starter for the Marlins. And then this is why it hurts that Gio Gonzalez retired, because this would have been a good moment for him to step in right now and just help this team right now as a veteran piece and as a pitcher. Yeah, and I think we shouldn't be talking about trading any players right now. Honestly, we're only, I think, a month in the season. I think we could be maybe having that kind of a conversation possibly next month or in June, around June. That's when we could maybe say, okay, so the Marlins are in a win now mode, or at least in the wild card or in the search for a wild card, let's maybe look into trading some guys right now who most likely won't be on this team for a long amount of time anymore. We don't see them in the future, and start maybe bringing a bat. But I think the Marlins starting pitching rotation is so depleted right now. They only, like Eli said, only 3 pitchers pretty much right now. Trevor, Sandy, and Pablo. I don't think we should be talking about trading Pablo just yet, but I did have that opinion going into the last room. Like, if there's one pitcher that really we could trade, it'd probably be Pablo. And Pablo's he's a phenomenal pitcher, honestly. But I think it's still too early to talk about trading away Pablo Lopez or any pitcher on the Marlins staff right now.
Yeah, it's just way too early. I definitely agree with Kevin and Eli. And even past that, I would say if we're talking about trading next month or down the road, I don't think it comes from the major league staff, honestly. I think it comes from the minor leagues. You got the minor league season starting on May 4th. And we want to see where these prospects are. You want to see where Braxton Garrett is. You want to see where, all these other minor league pitchers are. I mentioned Garrett because he's on the 40-man, and somebody asked me the other day, why aren't we calling him up in this spot, to start, potentially tomorrow? And I said, well, he's been pitching, in minor league camp. They want to see where he is in minor league starts before they even think about calling him up. So, yeah, I mean, you want to see where guys are for sure. And if we do decide to make a trade next month or at the deadline or whatever it may be, I don't think it comes from the major league side, especially in terms of Rogers, Pablo, or definitely not Sandy. But, yeah, I don't think the Marlins are at all interested in letting any of those 3 guys go. I think if we do decide to trade, it's going to be from our surplus of arms at the minor league level.
Yeah, and I do agree with that because the Marlins have so many minor leaguers right now that are super talented, and they could be packaged in a deal. For an example, Wilson Contreras could be a good option. Marlins send out some minor leaguers for a guy like Contreras. I mean, it could be any player, honestly. It could be a good player, and also the outfield is so crowded right now. It wouldn't hurt to trade a couple pieces of that outfield, and just to put out a name, Jesus Sanchez. I mean, and it's still too early to say for Jesus. He did play last season, barely played, if we're being honest. So this is a name that just came up on my mind. Lewis Brinson could be another option. I don't think any team would want him, though, from how bad he's been with the Marlins. So it's just something to talk about. I don't think they're going to trade any veterans because the veterans, I think, is what helps this team out a lot. And it's probably going to be minor leaguers at this point. Yeah, I agree with you, Alex.
One name that I saw just an hour ago that I floated out there that nobody is going to be excited about is veteran Tanner Roark, who was with the Blue Jays these last couple of years. They paid him a 2-year, $24 million deal, and he stole that money from them, man. I mean, I don't like to phrase it like that with players very often, but he's just been terrible for them in 2020. And then the early portion of this year, they kicked him out of the rotation after the first week or two. And now they just designated him for assignment. That even with he's owed, I think, more than $10 million the rest of this year. And they're kind of conceded to the fact that it's a sunk cost. So and that's one thing I always admire teams when they do that. I mean, the Marlins, we've seen in some recent years, they are sometimes reluctant to admit when that money is going to waste. But the Blue Jays are trying to contend this year. They're kind of in the same track that the Marlins are in, but arguably a year ahead in terms of when they're actually going to be a contender. So they realize that he's not helping them right now. Get rid of him. We really need the roster spot. He's someone that, because of all the money that is owed to him, I'm not going to try to think of any sort of trade. He is going to clear waivers. He's going to become a free agent, and the Blue Jays are going to pay him all that money, and he's going to be a free agent. He is a kind of ideal candidate to pick up on a minor league deal because he is healthy by all accounts. He's been pitching for them early on the season. He's relatively stretched out, if not to be a full-time starter, to be pretty close to that, where the Marlins are in a situation right now where they have starting rotation depth issues. Long term, even you fast forward a month or two from now, they could be completely fine with their depth. If, fingers crossed, all those injured guys come back healthy, and some of these prospects, if Nick Neidert works on some things and comes back up and it looks better, if Braxton Garrett makes the final few adjustments that he needs to make at AAA and he comes up and he's a serviceable guy, very soon the starting rotation depth will look like a strength for this team, which is what we were hoping for just entering spring training. So that's a very big possibility. The problem is right now they have this kind of surprising opportunity where they are a half game back of first place in this division. And thankfully, because of all these teams in the NL East beating up on each other and frankly just not playing that well, where it's a situation where the threshold to make the postseason is maybe not quite as high as we originally thought. That even if this Marlins team is not a real championship contender in a traditional sense, that this is a year where fluky things can happen, and they just need to be a little bit above the 500 mark in order to get themselves back in for the second straight year. All these games count in the meantime, where until those guys get healthy, they have this very obvious hole in their rotation. And I mean, this is nothing that is going to happen overnight. I mean, even when Tanner Roark becomes a free agent, I think it still takes a couple days for that to happen. And then they would sign him to a minor league deal, I'm sure, with no guarantees. And then he actually needs to do something at the AAA level to show him that he's worth being selected to the 40-man and getting called up. That doesn't happen overnight, but it will happen. It gives them an opportunity to, again, continue to put out a real pitcher for these games for most of May. Really, the month of May it's going to be a very fascinating month where some of the schedule, you could look at the schedule and say the schedule is not that crazy for them. And that they do still have a lot of games outside the division as well, that it doesn't feel like every game is a must win, but the reality is that even Eliezer and Sixto, and especially Edward Cabrera, that they're a while off. You need guys to patch things in the meantime. They've had these candidates to try to patch things up. They've had Castano, they've had Neidert, and right now they're trying to stick with Paul Campbell. And the early returns are really discouraging for those guys. So bring in somebody else. Just keep adding to your depth. You can never have too much depth in your organization, especially when you have somebody like this. So I haven't even gone that deep into Tanner Roark. I don't know. I'm just basing it off of kind of fact that he's available and that he's healthy. That's kind of my only standard right now for the Marlins. If you're the Marlins, that should be your only standard when looking for rotation help is, are you healthy? And are you sort of stretched out to pitch? And with Roark, he's someone that has at least done a lot at the major league level before he joined the Blue Jays. Before he got that big contract, he was a perfectly solid number 4 starter. On his good days, he was even better than that. So he is just one name I'm floating out there, just because Kevin brought up Anibal Sanchez. I've written about Sanchez and I've had podcasts about Sanchez that I thought he was a great fit, but all the signs are that the Marlins are not interested, that it seems that whatever they saw during his free agent showcase last week did not convince them that he could be a big addition to them, or maybe he's still searching for too big of a contract. I don't know how that could be the case, but if no Anibal is still, the dream in terms of the available pitchers, then you just go down the list, and there are other guys up there that maybe with the right adjustments, they could be serviceable at the major league level.
Yeah, and when you talk about Tanner Roark, he's 0-1 with a 6.43 ERA for this season. So, you would for sure have to give him a minor league deal, see where he's at, probably in the minor leagues or in the alternate training site, just see how he's doing. And then you could give him the opportunity with the Marlins, possibly just to pitch a couple innings, or just give him a full start, see how he does against these major league teams. And I think he was in the American League, so maybe the National League helps him out a little bit more. He was very solid with the Nationals, coincidentally, the team they're playing tonight. So maybe him in the National League it's just better for him than being in the American League, since there is no DH here in the National League.
Yeah, it makes sense from the standpoint of they need somebody right now, and basically everything that we have. You have a Dan Castano. Past him, what do you have, right? You saw Neidert come up and he struggled, so they're going to want him to get some time in the minor leagues. Braxton Garrett, as I mentioned, and as Eli mentioned, not quite ready yet, but not far away. So they want him to get a couple starts at least at the AAA level, which is very likely where he's going to start. We're waiting to hear on that today, but where each of these guys is starting. We're expecting minor league rosters today, but it hasn't happened yet. So I'm sure we'll get that officially soon. But yeah, I think that if there's a guy that makes sense, definitely bring him in on a small minor league deal. I thought Anibal made a lot of sense, and I don't know. Obviously, I'm not there, but I don't really know why they would be out Apparently they are, because we haven't heard anything at all, or not even anything linking the Marlins to them other than that they went to the showcase. So yeah, Roark definitely would make sense, but it's probably going to be a little bit if they do try it, because he's got to still clear waivers, and then as we said, it's a couple days after that before he can sign any other deals. So we'll see what they do, but they definitely need something of established major league veteran kind of guy to fill that hole and bridge the gap to these minor league arms.
And if we keep talking about, if we keep talking about pitchers, I mean, Rick Porcello, he was on the Mets last year. I don't think he had a good season, but this could be a good option just to see where he's at. See if he could maybe just give the Marlins a couple games, and then at the trade deadline, that's when they make the decision. And once everyone else is healthy, they can move him to the bullpen, or just, they could release him. I don't know how that would work, but I think Rick Porcello would be a pretty solid option for the Marlins, honestly, right now.
The reason why I made my face all big is because my green screen appears to be like working today, isn't it? Like for the first time ever, that it's not like glitching on us.
It's
that I have no idea.
Working. Yeah, you got a little grainy on the side there, but it's mostly working.
Yeah, I have no idea why. Because it was just earlier today that I had a door open and the wind blew in and actually knocked the whole thing down. And I was worried that it would be ripped and that it actually wouldn't work at all. And then apparently that did the trick, right? I mean, that's like when you have, if you have like electronic device that's not working, you just shake it around a little bit. I mean, I have no idea why, but I'm just grateful for where we're at with this green screen, because that was driving me crazy for this entire month, where for whatever reason it worked fine in Zoom when I was doing Zoom recordings. But to take people behind the scenes, we're doing this on StreamYard, which is a different application. It's a pretty good one, but for whatever reason, it did not like my green screen until now. So we've made it. We're now a professional quality production, at least for tonight, until it screws up again. So, but thank you everybody for who's been joining us. We are 18 minutes away from the start of this series opener. And you guys brought up some great points, and I was tuned out because I was admiring how good the green screen looks on here. But we've covered what else do we want to touch on before we get started with this game? The one thing that's been flying under the radar is that the Marlins offensively, you don't know how much this is going to translate now that they're obviously missing some key hitters, but they've done pretty good against left-handed pitching this season. I mean, there's a pretty noticeable split, hitting against lefties 259 with a 322 on base and a 459 slugging, compared to when they hit righties, it's a 221 batting average, barely a 300 on base, and they're not slugging at all against right-handed pitching. Tonight they get John Lester, who is making his very first start of the year after spending this entire first month on the COVID IL. And he's someone that, Alex, you mentioned earlier that the Marlins have had historically a lot of success against him. And that even though there was this, remember early on last season, there was this narrative that the Marlins they could not handle soft tossing left-handed pitching, that those lefties that you'd least expect had to have success were for whatever reason shutting them down. And that, if people have not noticed, like that has not applied to this year. This year, in fact, the two big offensive explosions that they've had, and I'm sure most fans remember it, it was that first weekend against the Rays. They put up, what was it? Was it 12 runs? Yeah, 12 runs to take one game from that series against the lefty, against Rich Hill. And then on April 13th against Max Fried, who was a Cy Young candidate last year, and he's obviously a lefty, as one of the most beautiful left-handed curveballs of anybody. And they put up 8 runs against him and ended up scoring 14 runs total in that game, their highest scoring game the entire season. So both those games when they had lefties starting against the Marlins, that's been a refreshing change, because it was kind of driving the team crazy last year. It dragged down their overall performance, and it made us question whether or not they would have enough to make the postseason. For whatever reason, they've kind of flipped the switch in that department. I don't really have any good theories, because it's most of the same personnel as last year. We've talked about this, how it's so many familiar faces who were here last year, and they weren't really hitting lefties all that great early on last year and kind of turned it around late. And for whatever reason, between like early 2020 and now early 2021, that they've made the right adjustments to that. So that's a little bit of optimism for entering tonight's game.
I think there's only one word we can maybe use, and it's adjustments. They've made adjustments. They've found out ways to hit against lefties, and it's worked. I mean, we saw it with Tampa, as you said, and Atlanta. 12 runs, 14 runs. It's been working, and hopefully it keeps working because we need it for sure, especially tonight. John Lester is a good pitcher, and he didn't have a good 2020, but earlier, and he is only 30. He's 37 now, so I mean, we'll see what kind of John Lester we get tonight. It could go two ways. It could go horrible for him, or it could go great. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I could bring this up as I guess I don't want to date myself, but Eli, you probably remember this as well as I do. When the Marlins would never, ever, ever in a million years, no matter how many games they played against this guy, be able to hit Jamie Moyer. Jamie Moyer gave the Marlins fits for how many years? I probably his entire career. So, just based off of that and remembering how much the Marlins historically struggled against him, as much as they did, to see the Marlins, obviously it's not against him, but to see them hitting against similar pitchers, maybe not the same pitcher, but to see them hitting against similar pitchers that's really refreshing in terms of just being a Marlins fan as long as we have. So, yeah, I mean, tonight it's a righty-heavy lineup. I think Isan, the only lefty, if I'm not mistaken, sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah. And Pablo is lefty.
And Pablo. Yeah. Oh, I forgot. Sorry. And yeah, so we'll see how those guys do. Pablo, great hitting pitcher. And then Isan, I thought he had two pretty good at bats with those walks, I think, in that last game. So we'll see what happens. It's definitely good to see them hitting against these soft tossing guys. And just as a last point for me, and then I gotta go. But you see with the recall of Monte, this is the last thing I wanted to mention, Eli, that now all three members of the Yelich trade are back on the Marlins. So maybe the last time that we see this, not sure. But yeah, they're all three here. And then, of course, we're going to need to make moves. So maybe one of those guys earns his spot on the bench, whether it be Brinson, Isan, or Monte. So we'll see what they do. We'll see how this goes. But yeah, this is going to be an interesting night for sure.
Yeah. Appreciate you joining us for almost all this 3/4 of the show, even though you have other stuff going on. You're great on this platform, Alex. We always appreciate having you on. And
thanks for having me, guys. Enjoy the game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Alex brought up right before he's logging off, he brought up Jamie Moyer, of course, and how much the Marlins struggled against him. And Jamie Moyer was the victim, as Sean brings up. He was in 2012, first year Marlins Park. He very famously allowed that grand slam. You may remember this, that Stanton hit off of the scoreboard. He damaged the scoreboard at Marlins Park with the grand slam in 2012, one of his first few years in the big leagues. And that was against Jamie Moyer, and that essentially ended Jamie Moyer's career. That was the second to last game that Jamie Moyer ever pitched in the majors. He hit it so hard off of the scoreboard that it turned off a couple panels on the scoreboard.
Oh, yeah, I've heard about that.
And this was the first year of the new stadium. This is just a couple months into the season, and it came full circle. So after years of Jamie Moyer, mostly with the Phillies being a guy that drove the Marlins crazy, that they kind of put him out of his misery when he was.
They got the bets out of him at the end.
Yeah. Ultimately.
And I think something else I do want to bring up is Brinson's batting fifth. He's been batting in the bottom of this batting line of around 7, 8. I'm surprised he's at 5. I don't know what you might think about this, but he's been decent. He's not been horrible. He's had his moments at bat. He's been decent defensively. Isan had, I think, a better game than him on the Brewers game, on game 3 of the Brewers. He had an RBI in his first game, so I think Isan should be a little bit higher in this batting rotation over Lewis Brinson. But again, Isan just got in. Brinson, he's been on this team for a couple weeks now. He should be getting accumulated, hopefully. And we'll see what we see from him tonight. But this is a big test for Brinson. Maybe this is just the sweet spot to have him on. He just starts hitting. He starts producing for the Marlins, having at least productive at-bats for the Marlins. I don't know what you might think about Brinson as the fifth batter.
No, I mostly agree with you about this lineup. There honestly just are not a lot of great solutions right now, just because of all the guys are missing with injuries. But yeah, going through the lineup real quick: Miguel Rojas first, Jesus Aguilar, Garrett Cooper, Adam Duvall, and then this bottom half: Lewis Brinson fifth, John Birdie, Sandy Leon, Isan Diaz, and Pablo Lopez. And when we posted the lineup, the most common comment, really the only thing that people were mentioning, was that they could not believe Brinson was batting fifth. So it is.
I'd put Pablo Lopez over Brinson at this point, if we're being honest.
Facing a lefty, Pablo is a left-handed batter against. Maybe you keep Pablo ninth just because of this particular matchup and because he didn't bat at all last year. But I have almost as much faith as Pablo as I do in Brinson right now. I agree with that.
And I do think Birdie could be a little bit higher on this lineup. I mean, he's been pretty good lately. 2 home runs. I think he could be over Brinson, and he does bring speed. So I do like. I would prefer at least Birdie at 5, Lewis Brinson at 6. Leon's been pretty good offensively. He's been good defensively too. So that's, I think, something that the Marlins have needed for sure, which is an offensive spark. And the catcher play with Wallach has not been good. We saw it in the San Francisco game. I do excuse that a little bit just because of the weather conditions. But still, I think it's a little bit unexcusable seeing the throws that he's been making. I don't think they've caught a runner all year, if I'm correct. At least 1 or 2 at most. I don't know if you have that.
With Wallach, that's been one of the. We're not going to spend too much time on Wallach because he's not in the lineup tonight, and it does seem that he has kind of been surpassed by Sandy Leon. That Sandy Leon, to this point, is getting slightly more than half of the playing time, which would surprise people because Sandy was not even on the roster until Alfaro got hurt. And with Wallach, the reason why tonight I feel makes a big statement about that is that Pablo was pretty vocal about how much he liked working with Chad Wallach last year. I mean, they were almost matched up for most of the season last year when Pablo obviously had his career year. The fact that coming off an off day, you would think that they could go in either direction and that they might lean towards the individual guy that has more history with Pablo, and they didn't do it. I'm not necessarily that confident in either guy. With Sandy, you could take note that at this moment he is hitting 350. Nobody could take that away from him tonight, that he's getting hits, but it is what you would call a very empty 350 batting average because he's not doing anything else but hitting singles. He's getting singles to the right spot. He's not drawing any walks, and you know that he's not really a power threat. He did have that one hit that I don't know if people remember this. He did have one hit that I think went all the way to the wall.
That was his first game.
His first game. Right? So that really should have been more than a single. But the problem with Sandy is that Sandy Leon is that he's even slower as a base runner than Chad Wallach is. So as long as the ball is in the park, he's just not going to get as many bases as he should, just because of the reality of being a catcher, a 32-year-old catcher, that he's a very limited offensive player. But he's definitely the better defensive player from what we've seen so far this season. So I like seeing him. Yeah, I could actually spend a lot of time on this current lineup situation. I would probably have John Birdie in one of the top 2 spots in this lineup.
That's what I was going to mention. But I mean, I think Aguilar has been pretty good there, and Miguel Rojas too. I think that's what the Marlins. I think that's probably been one of their better lineups. That's the one I think they did against Tampa with the 12-run game. I think Miggy was at that first, so I think that's why they've done it, and it's been maybe one of the more successful lineups we saw the first one, which didn't have Miggy. Then we have the one with Miggy at first, and then we have Jazz. That's been maybe the most successful one. Second most successful being the one with Miguel Rojas at batting first. I do think John Birdie could be one of the top batters here, but just the production that Miguel Rojas has brought lately, and Jesus Aguilar, he's been on fire. I think this just the top 2 looks. I think it's that's what it should be right now. And going back to Sandy, I think Sandy Leon, I think we saw what happened with Alfaro last year. Pitchers were more comfortable with Chad Wallach. I think we're seeing this now happening to Chad Wallach, where pitchers are more comfortable with Sandy Leon. We've seen Trevor Rogers. He's been great with Sandy Leon, and all these pitchers have been really good with Sandy Leon. I don't know if Sandy Alcantara has pitched a game with him, if I'm correct. I don't think he has. He's the only one, I'm pretty sure. But again, this pitching rotation doesn't really so it's been switching so much that it's still undefined who should be that number 1 catcher.
Yeah, the sample is just so tiny. Like we're only talking about a handful of games. There's only so much you can learn so far. With this line, you bring up a good point that what we've seen, especially, it's very particular. That I mean, there were cries not that long ago to have Miggy Rowe as the leadoff man for all games, but what we've seen the Marlins settle on is that against left-handed pitching, he's the guy that bats lineup, and that's leadoff. And then they usually drop Corey Dickerson down. That's not even an issue tonight, just because Corey Dickerson is still recovering from that minor groin issue. They think he's going to be totally fine, but not even in the lineup tonight. So that makes it an easy choice. And I understand that it should be mentioned with Miggy Rowe. I don't know if people really noticed this, but he had a bad series against the Brewers. They did win the series, but it was kind of in spite of Miggy, where mostly on the offensive side, he struck out 7 times in 3 games.
Okay.
And I don't know, you got to process how crazy that is to strike out 7 times and he only batted, I think, 12 or 13 times. He struck out over half of his plate appearances in those 3 games. It's a tiny sample, but it's so unlike him. Like, I actually looked it up. He had never done that before during like any series of his career. So that
he's had for sure a struggle to start of the season. I'll say that.
Yeah, the reason why that might be a little bit significant, it's just 3 games, but before that, and even during that series, and Don Mattingly even mentioned it, that he's not playing at 100% healthy, that he had this hyperextension of his elbow. I think that's how they described it, hyperextended elbow that he's able to play through, they think, for now. But he could be seen kind of during games rubbing it a little bit. It was actually one of our Twitter followers, Jane. I don't think she's on the stream, but she's the one that first brought it to my attention like a full week ago when they were actually in San Francisco, that he was bothered by whatever this elbow forearm discomfort is, and he's been playing through it, and that's very admirable, and they love it. You just have to wonder whether it's actually affecting his game. That I'd have to take a closer look. So this is something where you don't want to get too obsessed with what happens in a tiny sample size, but if it continues like tonight, if tonight he strikes out a couple of times against the lefty, and we know he generally has so much success against lefties, then maybe this is something that I take a closer look at to try to understand what's going on there, because they really can't. They've oh my goodness, if he goes on the injured list, then what do they do?
Yeah.
Shortstop, they play John Birdie at shortstop, but that assumes that Brian Anderson is back to play third base, and then their other option, they just are running out of options with their injuries currently, so they can't afford another one. You admire Miggy trying to play through it just because he knows the team is in big trouble if he's not there. But there comes a point where if he's just not himself, then he's hurting the team. So that's a situation just to watch closely. I don't want to overreact yet, but
he hasn't been good offensively, but defensively he's been great. I mean, he's been great. I don't know if whoever watches the top 5 plays, I think he's been in both of them that have done that for now this season, I'm pretty sure. And going to John Birdie's been maybe one of the better players on this Marlins team because of how reliable he is. He could play the outfield, he could play the infield. So that's how reliable John Birdie is. And this would be one of the bigger losses for the Marlins if he gets injured. Hopefully he doesn't. And again, Miguel Rojas on defensive end would hurt big time if he gets injured. So it would be weird to see what the Marlins do. Most likely Birdie would be playing shortstop. And then we would have, I don't even know what the batting lineup would look like. Most likely, John Birdie would be first at this point. And I was going to bring up another topic. Miguel. I forgot.
Well, we're running out of time anyway. We've filled up this whole hour only with 2.5 people, which is incredible. So great job stepping up, Kevin. We had a special guest plan just for the 8 people remaining. We did have a special guest planned, and we hope to have them come very soon in one of our future series streams. So looking forward to that. But we enjoyed being on here just with us, and a lot of good comments. We appreciate that. We want even more of those going forward from you guys, more engagement. It was, our guy Bassmaster brought up earlier about experimenting with Twitter Spaces. I've seen a few people using that recently. I haven't tried it out yet, so to see exactly what that is. But we're gonna play around with
StreamYard is that you could simultaneously, go live from different spots. I don't think Twitter Spaces does that.
Right. Yeah. So I'm pretty happy with our setup, but we're going to continue to try to make it better. And so we will be back for this next upcoming series next week. But in the meantime, enjoy the rest of your weekend. Any final prediction for this series in these 3 games? How many the Marlins are going to win?
They could win all 3 for sure, but realistically, I think they'll win 2 out of the 3.
I have to think closely about that.
It's a statement game for sure.
I'll be pessimistic. I'm always a pessimistic guy on here. I think they just win 1 of the 3 games. That this is where the injuries really catch up to them. But I hope to be wrong, because I love following a team that is at 500, that's in first place, and they have a chance to do that against all the odds. They got a chance to surge into first place this weekend, potentially. But thank everybody for joining us here on the stream and all the engagement that you guys have brought. First pitch coming up Pablo Lopez, John Lester, the first of 3 at Nationals Park. I'm Eli Sussman with Kevin Barral, and enjoy the series. As always, go Fish.
Yep.